The New Orleans Saints secondary is the strength of its defense, and Marshon Lattimore could be in for a huge year. We got all that and a little bit of lanyard for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? Welcome into another episode, this Monday edition of Locked On Saints, your daily podcast covering the New Orleans Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks so much as always, making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget that we're free and available on all platforms, including on YouTube as well. And I'm your host, Ross Jackson, at Ross Jackson Nola. There it is on Twitter. You can find me over at USA Today's Saints Wire, Tuesdays on Locked On NFL, and here with you every single Monday through Friday on Locked On Saints. Today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by our friends over at Bet Online. They got all the odds, lines, and props more than ever before, so make sure you go and check them out today. Bet Online, where the game starts. On today's episode, we're breaking down the defensive projection when it comes to the New Orleans Saints 53-man roster. We broke down offense on Thursday, circling back around to defense today. We're going to talk about a couple of big storylines for the 2022 season in the meanwhile. And the first big storyline that I want to jump into might be the biggest around the entire defense when it comes to the 2022 NFL season for the New Orleans Saints, which is that the secondary is truly the strength of that team. Let's start off with the projections in terms of who I believe will make the roster at this time. Remember, we're looking at this early, so this is a lot of like setting the table. And then once we get to mini camps, which are the 14th, 15th, and 16th, and then late in July, once training camp gets started, then we'll see some things move around, shift, change, stuff like that based upon some of the performances during training camp and, of course, during the preseason. But this just kind of sets the table for right now. So I have the Saints right now keeping 10 in their secondary, 5 corners, 5 safeties, depending upon how you like to classify guys, right? Do you like to call CJ Gardner-Johnson a safety? Do you like to call him a corner? Do you like to call PJ Williams a safety, or do you like to call him a corner? That can fudge some of these numbers. So we're doing the secondary as a whole, then we'll go linebackers, special teams, and then we'll jump into defensive line. And then I'm going to wrap up by telling you why I think Marshon Lattimore is in line for a huge season in 2022. So the players that I have sticking around right now, right, the guys that make sense in terms of making the 53-man roster in the secondary are, so your starting cornerback Marshon Lattimore, obviously absolute lock. Paulson Adebo, last year's third round selection. He was your cornerback 2 last year, performed extremely well in that role. I'm going to put PJ Williams under corner, but you might also put him under safety, but consider him a defensive back. But I've got him making the roster, of course. Alontae Taylor, who the Saints drafted in the second round, and then Bradley Roby, who the Saints traded a third round selection for last year. Never got the opportunity to start because he was let by Paulson Adebo. Bradley Roby was suspended for the first game of the season last year, and Paulson Adebo just never let go of that cornerback 2 spot. So those are the 5 corners that I have staying on the roster. Marshon Lattimore, Paulson Adebo, PJ Williams, Alontae Taylor, Bradley Roby. A lot of versatility in the backups there. PJ Williams, Alontae Taylor, and Bradley Roby. Those guys can play in a bunch of different spaces. Speaking of versatility, over on the over on the safety side, when it comes to the secondary, Tyrann Mathieu, CJ Gardner-Johnson, JT Gray, Justin Evans, Daniel Sorensen for now, with Marcus Maye suspended. I think his court trial is set to happen in August, and if it happens in August, that should be early enough that the suspension actually takes place early on in the season so that it happens right at the beginning of the season, which is actually kind of best case scenario for the Saints. I'm kind of hoping for something similar when it comes to Alvin Kamara's big questionable. Is he going to be suspended? Is he not going to be suspended? You'd rather have that happen early on in the season as opposed to late in the season. Last year, Deontay Hardy had his trial at the beginning of November, was suspended around November 24th, toward the end of November. So it took less than a month once the legal process wrapped up for the NFL's sort of discipline to set in. So you would imagine that if Marcus Maye's is set to happen, legal process is set to wrap up early August, then that would mean that by late August, we'll know what happens. So I would expect that that would mean that Marcus Maye would be suspended for the first 2 or 3 games of the season. That's why I've got Daniel Sorensen on the roster. You move on from Daniel Sorensen once Marcus Maye is back on the field. I think in place of Marcus Maye, Justin Evans actually makes a ton of sense, or PJ Williams, depending upon which role of Marcus Maye's you need to fill. Deep safety, maybe more PJ Williams. In the box, maybe more Justin Evans. So that's our 10 in terms of the secondary +1 with the Marcus Maye suspension. That means that roster cuts include cornerback DeMarcus Fields, Vincent Gray, Dylan Mabin, and Jordan Miller, as well as safeties Smoke Monday and Bryce Thompson. Smoke Monday and Bryce Thompson, I think, automatically end up back onto your practice squad as well. Now, don't want a Trill Williams situation to happen like last year, right? So if he performs extremely well during training camp, then maybe Smoke Monday ends up being the guy that stays on the roster instead of Daniel Sorensen, and then you make another decision once Marcus Maye comes back from his suspension, if that takes place early on in the season. I could see that very much happening, but again, we're going pretty vanilla here in terms of just setting the scene, setting the table, and then all the adjustments happen during training camp. But watch out for Smoke Monday during training camp for sure. Because he's one of those UDFAs that I have really high in terms of potential to make the 53-man roster. So you look at this unit. Marshon Lattimore, Paulson Adebo, PJ Williams, Alante Taylor, Bradley Roby. That's a very strong cornerback room. Again, there's a lot of versatility there. Tyrann Mathieu, CJ Gardner-Johnson, JT Gray, Justin Evans. Once he returns, Marcus Maye, maybe Smoke Monday fits in there somewhere. That's a really strong safety class. And I think there are a lot of people that will tell you that CJ Gardner-Johnson, Tyrann Mathieu, and Marcus Maye might actually end up performing better for you in your system because of how much you like the versatility, that Dennis Allen likes versatility, that this defense likes sort of that multiplicity when it comes to safeties, when it comes to defensive backs. That might actually perform better for you, that group, than CJ Gardner-Johnson, Marcus Williams, and Malcolm Jenkins, because Marcus Williams and Malcolm Jenkins weren't very interchangeable. There weren't a lot of things that they did. I mean, Malcolm Jenkins is inherently versatile. You can play him in the box, you can put him on a tight end, you can line him up in the slot, but then you don't really have many other options outside of that, whereas Marcus Maye and Tyrann Mathieu can go from deep safety all the way down to the line of scrimmage and blitz, right? And everything in between. CJ Gardner-Johnson, same thing. So you like the versatility there. So I really think this is the strongest unit on the New Orleans Saints defense, which is going to match up extremely well, by the way, throughout training camp. Definitely something to watch, going up against what might be the strongest unit on offense, which is the wide receiver group, which I did not know that we would be saying at this point in the season. I had hoped, right? But 2 months ago, maybe we felt like we wouldn't be saying this right now. But now you have this really, really outstanding wide receiver core, this really, really talented secondary. And then, to borrow the phrase from co-defensive coordinator Chris Richard, iron sharpens iron. This defense, this secondary, is the strongest unit on this defense, and it's going to get even better because it's going to sharpen that iron against the strongest unit on offense throughout the entirety of the offseason. So that's pretty good, a good situation to be in when it comes to what you're looking at with that unit. Coming up next, we're going to talk about linebacker. We're going to break down linebacker, take a look at who is going to make the roster, who might not make the roster. One little surprise here that I think I might be a little bit higher on one player than a lot of other folks are, but it has more to do with where he plays than the actual talent. So we'll break all of that down as we continue on. And I'm going to tell you which 3 players, as we continue to have these conversations around some of these names, may not be showing up for minicamp because they're looking for a long-term contract extension and why they deserve it. We'll break all that down as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. But first, I'm going to tell you about our friends over at BlueNile.com, where you can celebrate all of life's moments and make them incredibly special. Whether you want to create a custom engagement ring for the person of your dreams, whether you're looking for a timeless classic, for a timeless jewelry piece like a tennis bracelet or maybe some diamond-studded earrings, all at prices that you're not going to find at a traditional jeweler. And they all follow really important standards that make sure that these are all sourced humanely as well. So you're not dealing with like the whole blood diamond conversation and all that stuff. So whether you're looking to build an engagement ring or you're looking to celebrate life's special moments with a fine jewelry collection, you're going to be able to find everything that you're looking for over at BlueNile.com. And best of all, Blue Nile has jewelry experts on hand 24/7 just in case you have any questions as well, all with the modern convenience of online shopping. So make your moment sparkle with jewelry from BlueNile.com, and Locked On Sports listeners, you're going to get $50 off of purchases of $500 or more. This podcast exclusive does include engagement as well. So use promo code Locked On. That's code Locked On, and every order is shipped free. It's insured, and it arrives in discreet packaging so that it doesn't spoil the surprise that's inside. Shop stress-free and find your forever piece at BlueNile.com today. All right, family, continuing on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, continuing on with our defensive projections for the 53-man roster. We broke down the secondary. We're going to loop back around to that because I want to tell you why I think Marshon Lattimore is going to have maybe his best season in 2022. Even for people that believe that he has been inconsistent throughout his career, there's a very specific reason why 2022 should be huge for Marshon Lattimore. We'll get to that here in just a moment. But first, I want to continue on and wrap up our look at the 53-man roster, setting the space here. As always, I appreciate you so much for making us your first listen of the day every day here on the Locked On Saints podcast, here across Locked On Podcast Network. By the way, we also have the NBA mock draft going on. Ultimate NBA Mock Draft 2022 is going to be starting on the 16th, this Thursday. So make sure you go and check that out wherever you get your podcast. You can search Ultimate Mock Draft 2022 or head over to the Locked On NBA podcast as well. Okay, linebackers. Let's break down this position group for the New Orleans Saints. This one was pretty easy for me, but I did have one thing that was a little bit surprising here. So I broke this down: middle, weak, and strong. Strong side plays on the side that has maybe the heavier blocking part of the scheme, maybe the running backs over on that side and shotgun, maybe the slot receivers there. A couple of different ways that teams will kind of diagnose what and when a strong side is versus a weak side. But consider your strong side linebacker more of your run stopper. So for me, I've got them keeping two: Caden Ellis and for now Zach Bond. Over on the weak side, which is a little bit more of your coverage guy, Pete Werner and Demarco Jackson. And then in the middle, your do-it-all guy, Demario Davis, of course. And then I've got them keeping Eric Wilson, the recent vet that they signed this offseason. And I have them keeping Eric Wilson over Andrew Dowell. And they have loved Andrew Dowell in the past. By the way, there's also Nephi Sewell as well as Isaiah Pryor, two undrafted free agents that I would have as cuts in this group. Andrew Dowell is somebody that the New Orleans Saints have really, really liked in the past, but hasn't really been able to stick. He's dealt with some injuries and things like that in the past. But he's definitely one to watch out for because he also has a little bit of that middle linebacker experience. But I think because of Eric Wilson's NFL experience at middle linebacker, having him behind Demario Davis, the guy that calls the shots, makes a ton of sense. Now, you can take the communication piece out of Demario Davis's headset if he ever has to be off the field and then give that to Pete Werner, right? Pete Werner throws one of the 3 green dot helmets on, which literally has a sticker on the back that shows, it's like a green sticker that says this has a communication device in it. That's the guy that sets up the defense, that calls the shots, that's getting stuff from the sideline until, of course, that communication device gets cut off. And so you have the guy that can do that on the field with Demario Davis and Pete Werner, because very likely Pete Werner is your starter next to Demario Davis, even if the Saints go out and sign Quan Alexander. However, you still need another guy to kind of back up that middle linebacker position just in terms of the execution of it on the field. Eric Wilson has the NFL experience at that spot. There's somebody else that has NFL experience at that spot. His name is Joe Schobert. He was somebody that I actually really liked for the New Orleans Saints when he was a free agent in 2019, I think before going into the 2020 season where he signed with the Jacksonville Jaguars. But he was somebody that I really, really liked. He is one of those guys that is just like a hard-nosed tackler, over 100 tackles over the course of the last 5 seasons since leading the NFL in 2017 with 140 plus combined tackles. He also plays very well in coverage, has some playmaking ability, tends to really go after the football, like peanut punch and go after the football when he makes tackles. He was brought in for a visit last week. We'll see if a contract ever actually gets done with him, but he would be somebody to maybe watch getting into the mix here because he would be a very good backup to Demario Davis as well. And he shouldn't cost that much. He was on a veteran minimum contract with the Pittsburgh Steelers last year and played a little bit as a pass rusher, played a little bit in coverage as well, and then still totaled over 100 tackles. I believe he led the team in 2020. Yes, he led the team. Oh no, he was second on the Steelers last year in tackles. So bit of a tackling machine, but he also makes some plays, good with pass breakups, reacts to the ball very well, has some nice catch-up speed. Actually looks pretty good when he has the ball in his hands too. Kind of surprising for a guy that's like 6'1", 240, but turns into a little bit of a running back with the ball in his hands. Of course, rookie Demarco Jackson out of App State, who the Saints drafted in the 2022 draft this year. Somebody that Emory Hunt actually called when he was on the show last Tuesday, the starter next to Demario Davis, said that he might be able to be the guy that leaps up there. Demarco Jackson might be the reason that Quan Alexander isn't back on the team. They might want to get a look at Demarco Jackson's sideline-to-sideline speed, his athleticism, because he's extremely athletic. And that was part of what made him so special at App State. He had a lot of leadership qualities as well on top of all that. But he is somebody that flies all over the field. So there's a good chance that like minicamp, training camp early on is a good chance to get a look at Demarco Jackson and then make a decision on Quan Alexander. And who knows, right? Maybe there is already an offer to Quan Alexander and his representation, but they just haven't accepted it yet. And maybe the visit with Joe Schobert was like, hey, we don't mind looking elsewhere. right? We just don't know yet. So we'll break down a little bit more about how Joe Schobert fits in tomorrow's episode as we kind of preview minicamp. But one of the things I want to mention, we've talked about CJ Gardner-Johnson, we talked about Demario Davis just now. We brought up Deontay Harty when we looked at last Thursday's episode when we broke down the offensive projections on that. Those three guys, according to Jeff Duncan over at NOLA.com, he's saying may not be present at minicamp. It'd be interesting to see if they show up at minicamp because apparently all three of them are seeking long-term contracts. So a big thing to watch. We'll break down what those contracts would look like at another time, but those are three big names to not have during mini camps, especially mandatory mini camps. So if there's a little bit of a contract holdout, don't be surprised while these guys continue to kind of look for long-term deals, right? Demario Davis's contract goes through 2023. His base salary for next year is over $8 million. So an extension would help to drop that. So I would actually help the team. CJ Gardner-Johnson right now, it has a cap hit of over $2.5 million right now in 2022. And so an extension with him could drop this year's salary cap. They also have $10 million of salary to spend if they want to front load a little bit of it, which would be a little bit different, but could be possible. And then Deontay Hardy is on like a $1.7 million first round or second round tender as a restricted free agent. So you knew already he was going to be looking for a long-term deal. And I think he deserves one. I think all three of these guys deserve one, right? And you can say long-term when it comes to Deontay Hardy and CJ Gardner-Johnson, you're looking for a new deal for Demario Davis, who, you're looking for 2-3 years in terms of what you can get in terms of beyond 2023. Okay. Real quick so that I don't forget it. We're going to jump to defensive line here in just a second. We're going to talk about, I'm going to tell you, one of the defensive linemen has a lot of pressure on him going into 2022. So we'll talk about why. But I also want to quickly just mention special teams, kicker Will Lutz, punter Blake Gillikin, long snapper Zach Wood. Nothing really surprising there. Watch out for a guy in Daniel Whelan, the punter out of Ireland, who has a big time boot. So he might challenge Blake Gillikin a little bit, but I think the ball placement is really elite with Blake Gillikin. So, I think your special teamers are absolutely set. So now coming up here in just a sec, as we continue on and wrap up the show, we'll jump defensive line. I'll tell you who's got some of the most pressure on him in 2022. But first, I want to tell you about our friends over at Bet Online, the place to go for all of your sports wagering needs. Your number one source for sports wagering information. You can get in on NBA Finals, game, series, MVP odds, all of it right now. Steph Curry right up there, dropped 43 points the other day. Is he going to be able to repeat it tonight? We'll see. But if you want to get in on those odds for MVP or maybe the game, anything like that, you could check it out. There's also a bunch of future odds you can get into. The Saints right now, big time favorites as they open up the season against the Atlanta Falcons in Atlanta. Get in on that line while it's still big. You could check out win totals. I think the Saints are still at 8.5 right now. So if you think they're going to be over, think they're going to be under, you can get in on that. There's a ton. There's even esports, UFC, MMA, boxing, whole bunch of stuff that you can check out over at Bet Online, our official online gambling partners here on the Locked On Podcast Network. So don't hesitate. Go and check them out wherever it is that you want to check them out, mobile device, laptop, wherever. Go and hit them up. Bet Online, where the game starts. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. Wrapping up today's episode of Locked On Saints as we finish up our 53-man roster projection. Remember, we broke down offense on Thursday. If you want to go back and check that out, now we're wrapping up defense with the defensive line, including one player that has a ton of pressure on them in 2022. I'll tell you who that is, but first, let me just go through the list here to tell you who I have projected as kind of the base line for 53-man starters this year. Cam Jordan, of course. Marcus Davenport, of course. Peyton Turner, of course. Carl Granderson and Tano Passanio, those are your defensive ends. So 5 defensive ends, the guys that you would pretty much expect in that group. Taco Charlton, really the only one left out there, but could potentially be a really valuable veteran to have on the practice squad. Remember, you can keep 8 on the practice squad this year, 8 out of 16 veterans on the practice squad this year. So that's really, really good. Defensive tackle, I've got them keeping 4. David Onyemata and Shai Tuttle, your starters from last season. I know David Onyemata didn't start the season because he had the 6-game suspension, but those were really your starters there. And then a guy that's going to challenge for that starter spot next to David Onyemata, Kentavious Street, and then a guy to watch, rookie out of Air Force, Jordan Jackson. I've got him making the roster for right now because they invested a draft pick in him, but that certainly does not mean that he is absolutely going to get a roster spot. The defensive tackles that I cut, Malcolm Roach, Jaleel Johnson, Albert Huggins, and then one other. Josh Black out of Syracuse. This guy is hyper athletic, and just someone to watch. Joshua Black. I think he's a practice squad guy at the very least, but we've seen it before, right? Shy Tuttle's an example. Malcolm Roach is an example. Taylor Stallworth was an example. Tyler Davison was as well. Undrafted free agent defensive tackles make New Orleans Saints rosters. And the one name that's there at that position this season, as of right now, is Joshua Black out of Syracuse. So watch for that name throughout training camp, okay? You could potentially see Ndamukong Suh as a part of this, right? ESPN named the New Orleans Saints as the number one landing spot for Ndamukong Suh, who is their top remaining defensive tackle. We'll see if that ends up being the case. I made the case for Ndamukong Suh last week. I think that he would be a great fit for the team. The guy that has the most pressure on him on the defensive side in 2022 as a whole, not just amongst defensive linemen, it's Marcus Davenport. And I'm not saying anything bad about Marcus Davenport. I'm just saying because he's on that 5th year option and he kind of has to prove. He had a great season last year, 9 sacks last year, great stuff, right? Dealt with some injuries and things like that, but he has to prove that he can stay on the field and continue to produce. We know when he's on the field, he produces. We know that he produces on 3rd down, which is very important. We know that he can produce in the 4th quarter, very important. So he just has a lot of pressure going into 2022 to make sure that he can maintain all of that and keep all of that up so that he earns that long-term extension. We were talking about CJ Gardner-Johnson, Demario Davis, and Deontay Hardy reportedly looking for long-term deals. Marcus Davenport's another one of those guys, but he's going to have to get out on the field and earn it. And so 2022 means a lot for him. It's a lot of pressure because it means a lot, right? Does he get the second contract with the team that drafted him, or does he hit free agency over the course of the offseason? His 2022 performance may be the thing that makes the difference there, right? That makes that decision. And Peyton Turner, who is set to come back in 2022, who was a first-round selection last year, he could be the guy that ends up also making Marcus Davenport expendable. Now, it would be great to have Marcus Davenport prove himself, Peyton Turner prove himself, then you're set at the edge for the future, post-Cam Jordan, whenever that is, right? So that's what you're really, really hoping for as a Saints fan. Getting Peyton Turner back, like full health and being as impactful as you hope that he can be in terms of what you've seen on his college tape, that's like getting what would be a 4th first-round pick back this season, right? Because you've got Chris Olave and Trevor Penning, who you drafted this year. You're getting Michael Thomas back. And then if you get Peyton Turner operating at a top level, then all of a sudden you've got 4 first-round picks coming and making an impact for you, right? What feels like 4 first-round picks, air quotes on those, in 2022 at premier positions, 2 wide receivers, a left tackle, and an edge rusher. It's a really, really good situation to be in. Okay. To wrap us up here, I like doing our 2-minute take, right? Our last thing in terms of wrapping up the show. So I encourage you to interact with this, to let me know what you think, to discuss amongst yourselves, all of that. So I want to wrap this up by telling you why I think, and I'm going to give my notes for this, why I think Marshawn Lattimore is in for a great season in 2022. So even if you're one of the folks that believes that Marshon Lattimore is somebody that has been inconsistent throughout his time, I tend to challenge a little bit that narrative. But a lot of folks subscribe to it, right? A lot of folks believe that Marshon Lattimore has shown an inconsistency, particularly playing down to talent and things like that. And if you are concerned about Marshon Lattimore playing down to talent, there is absolutely, even if you're one of those people, there's absolutely no denying that 2022 could set up to be a huge season for Marcus Davenport. And there's 2 reasons why specifically. First of which, listen to the talent that Marshon Lattimore matches up with in 2022. Mike Evans twice, DJ Moore twice, Justin Jefferson and Adam Thielen with the Vikings, DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett with the Seahawks, Jamar Chase and T. Higgins with the Cincinnati Bengals, DeAndre Hopkins, he'll come back just in time for the Cardinals game. That'll be the first game that he's back after his 6-game suspension. Devontae Adams now with the Las Vegas Raiders. Cooper Kupp now, of course, just got paid over in Los Angeles. Deebo Samuel with the 49ers and A.J. Brown with the Philadelphia Eagles. That is 12 games of top-tier wide receiver talent that Marshon Lattimore will be lining up opposite in 2022. And depending upon how you feel about the Atlanta Falcons, Drake London, Kyle Pitts, and now Bryan Edwards in that mix, you can call that 14 out of 17 games that he's going to line up against very good talent, 12 out of 17 that he's going to line up against top-tier NFL wide receiver talent in 2022. So if you're worried about playing down to competition, there ain't no competition to play down to in 2022. Marshon Lattimore has to be at the top of his game, and I think he will be. The second reason that I believe he's going to have a huge 2022 is because all of those wide receivers over the course of 14 games, they're going to get targets, which means that Marshon Lattimore is going to get plenty of targets as well. Marshon Lattimore has never been targeted more than 100 times in a season so far in his career, but he was targeted a career high last year with with 94. And he also led the NFL when it came to forced incompletion percentage amongst all players at his position to play in at least 200 coverage snaps. That's a lot of cornerbacks with 20%. So he's going to see a lot of targets. He had a career high in terms of forced incompletion percentage last year, a career high in terms of pass breakups last year with 18, and then added the 3 interceptions as well. So he's going to see a lot of balls coming his way. He's going to see a lot of passes coming his way. And with that, if he can carry that 20% forced incompletion percentage over into 2022, he's going to have an opportunity to impact a lot of games. And oh, by the way, no cast on the hand this year. All right, y'all. So let me know what you think. Do you think Marshawn Lattimore is going to have a big 2022? Coming up tomorrow, we're going to break down what you should be looking for when it comes to minicamp. We're going to break down those long-term contract extensions that players are hoping for. We're also going to break down positions to watch and why veterans appearing is really, really important for the young guys and what you should be watching for as minicamp kicks off on Tuesday, the 14th. So we're going to break all of that down tomorrow. Later on this week, we've got guests. We got a bunch more stuff coming up as well. So don't forget to tune in every Monday through Friday here on Locked On Saints. I appreciate you as always making us your first listen or watch of the day every day. Don't forget to also go and check out for your second listen today, the Locked On NFL podcast. Get everything you need to know around the NFL in less than 30 minutes. As always, y'all, I appreciate you so much for making me a part of your day and a part of your routine. I'll see you tomorrow. And for everything you need in between those episodes, make sure you follow me on Twitter at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you living. Let me know how your mom and them. And trust Who Dat Nation. I'll holla at you.